Hi Rob, you alright?
All right, I'm all right. How are
Good,
you?
good. Yeah, busy mate, but unusually. But
Yeah, it's right. Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Are
Busy in a different way to normal.
exactly, yeah. Have you been up to much today?
Yeah. Uh, I did an interview with my energy company this morning on EVs. That was interesting. So quite
Right.
enjoyed that.
Is that with Octopus?
And yeah, Octopus. Yeah. So from what I understand, they want to do some video things on the new generation starting to move towards automatic, therefore EVs as well.
Hmm.
And they said they're going to post me some video equipment to film some stuff. So they can't come round, obviously. So they're going
Hmm.
to post me a load of video equipment, which I'll have no idea how to use, but I'll work it out. It'll be fine. So that was good. That was the highlight of my day. Walked the dogs, took the poodle to the groomer. So that gave me a essential journey that I was allowed to actually go out in the car. Don't get out
Good,
much nowadays. Yeah, it's my day.
very good. And of course, you're using full facilities and warming it up before you get in right now.
Oh
I
yes,
know.
yeah, yeah. As much as I can do, I'm making good use of that. Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely,
It's a nice feature. Mm.
absolutely, yeah. So do you want to start there then? So how's your journey been since your dot of become? Because I think we actually qualified in a very similar period of time. If I remember, actually, we were having conversations on driver. What was it? Driver training today? Was that what it was called? The forum?
Oh gosh,
While
yeah, that was a
while
while
back.
ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah. So what was your journey then?
From being an ADI at the start.
Mm, mm,
Well, I started my training around 2003, and slightly unusual because I never really liked driving. So driving wasn't something I really got any enjoyment out of. And the background to what led me to, apply to try and be a driving instructor would mainly be grounded in an absolute determination that I wanted to be self-employed. It was a route into becoming self-employed through a desire to have my own business, to do my marketing, my advertising. I wanted to build a website. It all centered around that desire to work for myself. And I can be quite controlling over that, which might not be a good thing, trying to do it all in-house, with the exception of CPD.
mm,
But that's a whole other ball game as well.
mm.
Took me a while to qualify. I struggled. I found the training process really quite challenging. If I'm honest, very inadequate. I felt completely unprepared for the part three, really sinking, but very determined. And it led me to feel that, in a lot of things, I will just fail my way to success. And after, sort of like two goes round the training process, qualified in 2006, yay. Was a PDI in 2005.
Mm.
Went straight in with setting up my own company from day one. Again, that's part of my slightly over controlling. I want to do this my way on my own, and I completely acknowledge that is not always healthy, and it wasn't in my early years. I can look back now and see that wasn't great because I did isolate myself, and I did the thing where you get advice, but in your head you think, I'll try it my way first. And then you sort of like learn why someone else has told you that that might not be the best way.
Mm.
Um, Going beyond that, so going a bit further down the line, when we get to about 2011, that's the point when I ended up with a student who things didn't go too well. So I was a little bit rigid in my ways. I had my way of teaching. Um, I thought it would work for everyone, and I got stuck with a pupil where he wasn't happy, I wasn't happy. It wasn't a good experience. I can't quite remember how things panned out at the end, but I remember finding out, must have been through some conversation, that he had ADHD
Mm.
and other conditions, and I knew nothing about that. And that was the trigger for me of realizing, I want to learn about this stuff. I want to know what went wrong and what I can do moving forwards. That was the catalyst to the special needs side of things. And I read a series of books by John Brown, who is
Mm-hmm.
brilliant and wrote his books for ADIs on special needs. I started actively trying to only fill my diary with special needs pupils to kind of immerse myself in a very, very broad, diverse student base, which I've now done pretty much non-stop since 2011. And that got me to where I am now, as in sort of like purely just working with special needs, learning difficulties. And I always describe it as students who struggle with the process of learning to drive. So they might have tried previously, and I enjoy doing the work of assessing, is it viable? Is it a timescale problem? You know, you might be looking at a significant timescale. I quite like doing that and working with like the parents or the carers or whatever it happens to be. EVs crept in 2017. That followed a test drive in a Leaf in 2015. Now this is interesting because I said at the start that I didn't like driving, and right up to 2017 that remained true. So I love teaching driving. I really enjoy working with someone in that one-to-one kind of thing, getting around the problems, finding the way forward. But when it got to 2017 and I got the first Leaf, that was the moment when I discovered that actually I enjoyed driving. So driving the electric car was very different. And that got me to where I am now. Driving electric cars, teaching purely special needs. Not bored of it yet, so intending to keep going for a very long time, I imagine, yet to come.
So what was it about that electric experience, that Leaf experience, you think triggered that?
I think a little bit of it is breaking away from the physical element of gears. So we could argue a little bit is more the automatic side of things as opposed to the electric side of things. But it is more than that. It's slightly bizarre that just shifting the fuel source, just shifting the method of moving the car causes such a transformation in the driving experience. And I know I am not alone in this. Forums are absolutely full of people switching to EV and then suddenly discovering it really is quite a revelation. And what's weird is that, you know, the novelty is failing to wear off. I'm as excited as I was back in 2017 now, and I'm still waiting for the moment when it just becomes my car. But that's not happening. You know, plugging my car in at night, waking up and it's fully charged, it preheats itself, it's beautifully smooth. And there's something about the acceleration of an EV, which is just so next generation from combustion, that it's a really big leap. And when I went out today to the groomers, which was nice to get out briefly, I enjoyed that. You know, really nice drive. It's a lovely car. All the EVs I've driven have been a really enjoyable drive, but the e-Niro in particular is top notch, brilliant.
Yeah, I think there's almost an element of luxury there, isn't there? Whether it's the torque, whether it's the silence, whether it's the fluidity, the smoothness of the vehicle. I think it's a combination of things there. And again, like you said, like the extra features that invariably you get on electrics, the fact you can warm them up beforehand, the fact that you don't have to visit a petrol station every time you want to fill up. It's already filled. Fill it up now.
And those advantages allow you to forgive the early day problems of being one of the early adopters. So, you know, you can rock up at a charging network. I've had this before, and there's 3 of you stuck there and the blooming charger's broke and you're all sort of like trapped talking about how amazing your cars are while not being able to drive the things because there's a problem. But still you get that attitude of, despite that, just would not go back. And all of these early adopter problems will go away anyway. We'll get past them.
And there's a community around EVs, I think, as well, isn't it? Like you said, if there's a charging point down, there's that conversation and people are very positive generally.
Oh goodness, yeah, and so inquisitive. You know, I went to Tesco's yesterday, plugged my wife's Ioniq into the free Tesco charger, and when I came back, there was a guy just walking around the car looking in the windows. But that's incredibly common. And then you end up having that kind of EV curious conversation, which I'm always more than happy to have. But
are you an EV virgin? You know,
and it's the same questions, of course. You go through the same questions again and again and again, but it's fun. because there is a bit of a learning curve in there, and it is quite different. So they're all valid questions. They all make sense.
Well, I'd like to go a bit more in deep conversation about EVs, but before we do that, there were some interesting things that you said at the start there. So one of them was that you learn through failure, which I think is a really important point, because I think we sometimes that's seen as quite negative sometimes in the industry, and I don't think it needs to be. I don't think it should be that.
No, and I think it's a part of the puzzle that pushed me towards wanting to work with students that, quite frankly, might not pass first time round. So working with students where it's viable, it can be done, but it's going to be a lengthy, expensive, time-consuming process. And the reaction to the driving test might mean that there's going to be problems at that end of that. But you end up with a history full of, thankfully, success stories where you start to realize, what looks impossible actually might just need a shift in mindset, particularly in terms of how long someone needs to learn to drive, because we get a little bit trapped in this kind of 30 to 60 hour time frame that we imagine everyone should take. And the bottom line is some people need a lot longer than that. When I was trained to be an ADI, everyone around me passed, and I didn't. Well, that's not quite true, but the people that I was working with while going through the training passed, and I didn't. And I kind of got used to this thing of others passing and I would be failing. And I'm pretty determined. So I did it again, and I got my part 3 on my 6th attempt, by which point I'd already gotten myself another job. And part of the reason I passed on my 6th attempt was because I got another job. I'd pretty much given up on the ADI thing, so I chilled out on the last one because it didn't matter if I failed it. I relaxed, it went really well, and I passed, which was nice. But it led me to this feeling of sort of like, it doesn't matter if I don't pass and somebody else does. I will just keep failing my way through to that success. And I think I've got that as a pretty strong mindset now, where, like in other things that I do, so like in my fencing, that kind of thing, I've noticed that others have joined the club after me and they're better than me, but it's fine. It will just take me what it takes to get to that level, that kind of thing. And I'm okay with that. I mean, using the same kind of idea, I entered my first ever fencing tournament at the start of 2020, just before the whole pandemic thing. And you're supposed to enter, at a bottom level and then work your way up. And I accidentally entered the wrong one. And I signed myself up for a veterans national. Well, in fact, it was more people coming from other countries. It was called the veterans, I don't know, sort of like fencing tournament. And it was inclusive of people who were trying to qualify for like Team GB to get their points up for that kind of thing. So I realized afterwards my mistake when I was talking to others in our club who have been doing it for decades, and they said, "Oh, I'm not entering that. I'm not good enough." It's like, oh dear.
Okay.
But anyway, didn't put me off. Gave it a go, and I didn't come last. So I came, I think it was 57 out of 60, and I was really pleased with that, because it was the first thing like that I'd ever done, and it didn't really matter if I lost it. It was just more for the experience, and I think I can do that fairly well with tests, and in terms of like my standards checks as well. I have to take a fairly similar approach, otherwise, like any of us do with the word test, I think I would fall to pieces. I used to cope better with role play. I used to enjoy doing role play. Bizarrely, I found that more like a real lesson than having someone sat in the back of my car. Although nowadays, actually, I deliberately try and get parents to come along where they want to, partners, that kind of thing, to be in the car, to create that sort of dynamic, partly to get the student used to it, and partly to get me more accustomed to what my standards checks are like. There is someone sat in the back of the car. That's just me firing off my thoughts there.
What was fascinating to me was about this whole learning process, because there's two things. I think the first one is when you're talking about learning or doing your training to become an ADI, how do you think we are at that as an industry? Are we like amazing at it? Are we okay at it? Do we need to do better? Where?
Well, my answer is going to be based on 2003 to 2006 training. So it wasn't great. To be honest, if I am honest, I was left feeling demoralized. I think I'm a little bit bitter about it, actually. I don't think I needed to fail it 6 times. It was also formulative in how I do things now. So my bad experiences have put me in a position where how I train is deliberately trying to avoid the experiences, the crash and burn type experiences that I've had, partly from learning to drive and partly from learning to be a driving instructor. Now, the idea of having, oh goodness, what was it? 5 days in a car, on the buddy system, 2 people in the car, getting to the end of it and then being told to book a part 3, that was a disaster for me. That was an absolute disaster.
Sort of
and I didn't.
Oh
goodness, ridiculous deep end. And I would never do that to one of my students. To try and reflect what I do. I mean, I'm sure a lot of us do this. I always talk about the product that I offer. So when I'm taking on a new student, I'm quite brutally clear that what I do not offer, I do not sell pass your driving test fast. That is not something I provide. What I will provide is a very, very comprehensive, very, very structured, yet highly flexible. So by using the word structured, it's because when I learn, I want to see the structure. I want to see, this is the course, this is the syllabus, this is the topics we have to cover, the material we have to go through. But at the same time, the whole thing is dynamic and flexible to the individual. But at the same time, no shortcutting. So I do a lot of work on dual carriageways, a lot of work on motorways, nighttime driving, rear-wheel driving. All of that was in Pass Plus. I pushed into my course. And the bottom line is that whenever I look at it, the sheer amount of content that's in it means that even with someone who finds it okay, breezes through the process, maybe neurotypical, does all right, it's still going to take about 50 hours just to cover the content that's in there. Doesn't mean that in some circumstances, excuse me, I haven't modified that to a couple of pupils where we've discussed that and talked about the reason why we might take out a few little bits if it's relevant to them. So I mean, myself as well, when I was, in my early days, I suffered very much from the feeling of needing to get my pupils to standard in a set time frame. And if we got to 40 hours and things weren't right, I would panic. So as the instructor, I would start to feel like, what's gone wrong? And I have the bad memories of pushing pupils towards a driving test because I thought that was what they were expecting. And it's quite possible I was imagining that. But the student was actually wanting to carry on, to focus on the course, the material, the content. And it was me as an instructor in my early days that was putting the pressure on to, my goodness, we've done 40 hours. We should be taking the driving test. Whereas now, I've managed to take that kind of pressure lid off myself. And that's where coaching has really helped. I mean, really helped. Now I've finally got to understand what is actually meant by coaching. Because again, I went through the whole phase of not really getting what that was.
I think something that resonated with what you just said is about this comprehensive syllabus. I don't know whether you've had this experience, but I've certainly had pupils and even for license holders from various different parts of the world that they'll describe their learning to drive process very much like you said. It was get through fast. It was like you say, I like the word shortcuts. I like that word because that describes very much sometimes people's experiences. We didn't cover this, we didn't cover that because okay, so is that relevant to you today? Yeah, it is. I still need that information, but it still was never covered. So I find that really challenging in our industry. I wonder where I know you said that often the pressure feels like it came from maybe the training, and maybe within our industry as well, to be seen to be almost a sausage factory, you know, pumping people out to get their test done.
Yeah, yeah.
But for me, it's always been about quality.
Mm,
I have done intensives, but I've always said at the start of doing them that there is a syllabus. I'm going to cover all of it, and if you're not ready, we will make an agreement about how we go forward from there at the end of the course. This is how much you paid for, and then if we're not
yeah,
ready, you know, we can add extra. And certainly I had people where we said that. Yeah, there were other people that actually, in fact, they'd already had some experience and they were fine. I think it's hard, isn't it? There's a hard balance there, about the
it
syllabus.
is. Yeah, and there's a pressure. I mean, you mentioned about a pressure. I mean, I certainly used to feel it, and it's almost that pressure, partly of seeing others, you know, maybe talking about having got students through in 30 hours, and now actually, you know, once upon a time I saw it as a good thing to get someone through in a short number of hours. Now it rings alarm bells.
Mm,
So a low number of hours to me, I don't feel is something to necessarily be proud of. If there's been a compromise made to achieve those low hours.
mm,
So in the same way, of course, people often talk about the whole thing of like, you know, you wouldn't want to know your airline pilot shortcutted some of the material on their course. I want to know that, you know, sort of like the driver is really prepared. None of this, you know, this line of you learn to drive after you pass your driving test. That's not great. There's a lot of truth in, you know, you continue to spend the rest of your life evolving, developing, building on your experiences. But the course, the initial course, should have a lot in it. You know, the
yeah,
content in it, the material in it should be thorough. Obviously, it should prepare for the driving test, but it should be going way beyond that,
mm,
into a lot more detail. You know, at the moment, my daughter is learning to drive, and maybe it's a, you know, slight side effect of overreacting dad, but we probably will quite genuinely do 100 hours,
mm,
and we will, you know, do a lot of motorway, a lot of dual carriageways, even more than I do with my sort of like normal bunch before we hit the driving test.
yeah,
And I try and stay in contact. So a lot of my students, you know, I make that point at the end of mentioning how, you know, although the course has ended, you passed the driving test. I think it's really important not to see that as the point where you cut off contact, but we
absolutely.
maintain that link. And it might be that, you know, after a few years, someone sends me a question, or they'll do just like an hour drive, or they bought a new car and they want to do a single lesson in their new car. Little bits like that I really like. So I maintain that contact with the pupils agreed. And, you know, we mentioned
Yeah,
at the end, so with the students agreement, that at any point that communication can keep going, and that's nice. I mean, I never had that, you know, with my driving instructor. It was just pass the test, end, job done. But it should go beyond that, definitely.
absolutely. I mean, I'm very much involved in that marketplace actually, um, in the fleet sector. And again, like I said before, it's quite fascinating to find out the bits that people either haven't gone through or maybe they perhaps haven't reflected, and there's no continuous learning or continuous reflection
Yeah,
on
yeah,
how they're doing further down the line. And I suspect that, you know, as I think you alluded to, there's always stuff that we will learn, you know, and we've been driving for a while and hopefully have good knowledge, but there's still stuff to learn. The one thing I have a slight problem with is, I deliver CPC training for truck drivers, and I find that a little bit too prescribed. It has to jump through lots of hoops.
hmm
You know, it's a bit DVSA. Not that I'm dissing DVSA, because I think it's good that they develop CPC courses. That's brilliant, but I just find
yeah,
it's quite. It has to follow a very strict guideline, which sometimes, like you said, we need flexibility within that to maybe,
oh
well,
yeah,
this person's highlighted this, we need to cover that. That's much more important than what the original plan was. So yeah, but yeah, I think it's good that type of training exists, but I wonder whether it's a bit prescribed at the moment. But like you said, in the informal way, if it's left open, as you know, there's continuous conversation going, I think that's great. I think that's
definitely
brilliant.
I mean, I've got I mean, just talking about that leaving it open side of things as well, and again, of course, you know, I mentioned about how that has to be, you know, with the students' agreement, because if we have a link, you know, through email or Facebook, something like that, obviously, you know, for sensitivity reasons, there has to be that thing where they can cut off communication at any point they want to. But normally it's a three-person thing, because I'll have the student and their parent as well. That's very common. I find that with the special needs side of things, that I've got the parent involved in that communication. So when there is a communication, it's the three of us in terms of that conversation. And I've got one autistic lad who passed his driving test between the lockdowns. And, you know, without any exaggeration, he will send me a question quite literally every single day. Not always, you know, sort of like driving related, but many of them will be asking me questions about his experiences with driving. And that's great. You know, that's really quite nice. And then we'll have a little chat about things. I might send him a little video, whatever else. And I always encourage them, you know, because you're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days. And it's quite important that you've got someone that you can maybe voice that to. It might not even be that I've got any magic answer or magic solution. It more is just being able to type it out, you know, the experience. I mean, I have so many memories of so many negative experiences in my early years of driving, and didn't have that output, you know, that ability to put that into any words.
So that's interesting then, because you touched on your own driving test experience, and you said that wasn't very positive. Not the ADI exam, the Cat B, I assume a Cat B test. So what was there something quite negative that happened around that?
Sorry, in terms of the driving test or the ADI?
Your driving test. Your driving test.
Yeah, it was a bad experience. So I passed my driving test second time round. Now, the first time round, I would suggest I strongly wasn't ready. Now, that's not, I couldn't pass a driving test. There's obviously a difference. You can pass a driving test not being ready, but that's a really bad thing, because it puts you in a situation where you're out on the roads and you're not really strong enough to be able to manage all of the things that are about to get thrown at you. So if I remember rightly, I had a very, very high number of driving faults going beyond the 15, which is immediately is a clue that something is not right. And even the second one, I think if I remember rightly, I came in with something like 13 driving faults and passed it. But there's still that evidence that something's wrong there by the high number of driving faults in what would have been 40 minutes. I can't remember how long the driving test was back in 1998. But it was a little bit different back then. But I know I think we'd just gained the Bay Park at that point. Oh, that's another one. I never learnt the Bay Park on my learning to drive. And I never learnt the Bay Park in my ADI training. The first time I did a Bay Park was on my first ADI Part 2. I remember the panic of being asked to do a Bay Park and realizing I literally, you know, how have I got through this long with not Bay Parking? I think I've just been forward parking for the past however many years it had been.
Well, of course, in EVs you have to sometimes, but that's a slightly different scenario we're talking about. So, but that's interesting, isn't it? That, like we said, with these shortcuts, so there's, I wonder whether that still exists in our industry. I think it does, but you know, gaps.
I think it does, but I sometimes don't think instructors want to be in that position. But again, they're feeling that pressure of that expectation to work miracles, frankly. And it is hard to get out of that. You know, a lot of people talk about how you know, the students don't want a comprehensive driving course. They just want to pass the driving test quickly. I'm not sure. Now, obviously, I can't speak for every student, and I have no doubt whatsoever that there are plenty of students out there that are only interested in that lightning fast get to driving test. But at the same time, I do think there are a lot of students out there who are reacting slightly to the instructor. So the instructor puts themselves under pressure, thinking the student wants to be done quickly, and the student is reacting to that. Whereas in fact, you probably find that if you had a really good chat about, you know, sort of like a comprehensive course, making sure you're safe for life, we can do dual carriageways, motorways, all of it, then you might find that actually the student is really, really grateful for that. One of the big things that I find with a lot of my students, now this is talking about working with students who have had difficulties, and they've tried before and it hasn't worked out, is what they're really grateful for and what the parents are grateful for is simply to find someone that's prepared to stick with them. That's what they're after. The timescales don't matter. Now, obviously, you know, it does matter to a degree. You know, I'm not saying it's not important, but the costs aren't the be all and end all of the process. They're just after someone that is going to see it through, and provide feedback. I think providing feedback back to the person paying, I find is key. You know, I find that's really important. A very open, very transparent system where everyone knows what's going on. So the student knows, you know, the journey ahead of them. They know where they're at. And if I get concerned, if I start to think, oh crikey, this could take a long time, then at that point it's important to have that conversation so that everyone knows what they're letting themselves in for, how long this could take, and how much this could cost as well. But a lot of them are just after that support, someone that's going to stick with them and see it through.
So I think there's two things interesting there. So the first thing is it links back to coaching, because the conversation you described there that an EDI might have at the start about what I might call contracting, if you like, with the student, which is, you know, what do you want from this? Do you want to pass quickly, or do you want to do a comprehensive course, or, you know, what do you want? What do you want to achieve, you know, when you get into a car, ultimately when you've passed, and do you want to feel, you know, how do you want to feel? And I think the second thing then links into this more specialist subject on people that maybe take that a little bit longer, or they struggle with certain things. So that's in. So do you said coaching's been particularly useful for you?
Yeah, definitely. And again, all of this kicked off around 2011. So I'd spent a good 5 years as an ADI in my own little kind of isolated bubble, not in an association, just kind of working on my own, talking to other driver instructors at the waiting room, that kind of thing, at the test centre, but really just working on my own sort of fine-tuned system, syllabus, all the rest of it. I have memories of, you know, tracking, you know, pass rates and all that kind of stuff. I'm not interested in doing that anymore. I don't know what it is. I don't care what it is, because there's nothing I can do about it. But yeah, and then 2011 hit, and that was when I started to look at special needs. Someone nagged me about a local association, joined the local association, got a bit involved in that, slowly sort of like eventually started going to some of the conferences. And then, I mean, this was triggered by, again, the special needs side of things. I read a lot. So since 2011, non-stop working through books and podcasts and audio books related to, you know, learning stuff. I like to learn things. And CPD wise now, sort of like I've gone a little bit, I do a lot. Well, a lot. I mean, every day at the moment, I'm doing half an hour every morning of like a little online course kind of thing, because I get bored very quickly. So I've gone from one extreme probably to the other extreme. And if anything comes in my area, you know, like a little course appears localish to me, then I'll try and join in that as well. But from that, you know, I remember going to Ian Edwards' coaching thing years ago, and that was the first time I stumbled across that. Didn't really get it, got mixed up and confused with the whole client-centered coaching thing. And it's taken a lot of constant watching videos, doing little sort of like online courses, going to various different driving instructor CPD things, to finally come to the conclusion that it's actually just really quite simple. And it just seems so complicated. And I don't know if we've made it unnecessarily complicated or something, because I don't know how to put it into words without selling it short. But obviously, it's just structuring it all around the student, and I love the fact, I love questions that are based around that. And again, it might sound daft, but I think the word I like to use the most is, feel. How do you feel about that? I love stuff like that, and the communication that you get, it's on a whole different level to just constantly trying to control everything. Allowing the pupil to kind of like lead and to gently prompt them down these thought processes and to see what they come back with and the ideas that they have. Yeah, I like that, and I wish I'd have had that. I really do. I'll tell you one of the reasons why I initially reacted very negatively to this idea of coaching. Again, this is going back many, many years. Was when it first popped up. Everyone was talking about the concept of, you just tell the pupil, you say to the student, what do you want to do? Which isn't quite right. It's not really what is meant by it. It triggered an old memory. It triggered a memory of being sat next to an ADI trainer doing my Part 3 training, and you get 5 days in car, and I sat next to him, and his words were, what do you want to do today? And it made me really angry, because my first thought was, I spent £4,000 on this blooming course. Where's your syllabus,
mate?
Where's your structure?
Yeah,
you're asking me what I want to do, and I know that's not what is meant by coaching now. Not so much the syllabus of the topics, but how you approach it, how the pupil addresses it, how they feel about it, how they react to it, how they input into it. I finally feel like I've cracked my understanding. That does not mean I've cracked my perfection of being able to do it. I'm a long way, a long way from being sort of like some amazing driving instructor. But step by step, and like all these things, we're all at where we're at the time. And I look back at where I was at 10 years ago, and I'll be somewhere different in another 10 years.
You are right. There's an interesting paradox within coaching, which is it's highly simple, but it's also highly complex. It's like it's the artistry in the question, isn't it? Which is amazing. I have a business coach. She's amazing, and her questions hurt. That's the best way of describing it, because you have to think. You have to think, and sometimes the answer is, I don't know, because you haven't thought of it that way before. So those are the really clever questions, I think. But like you say,
I like clever questions.
Sometimes there needs to be a little bit of prompt and a little direction.
Yeah.
So it's a hard
silence. I love using silence now, because that was a mistake I definitely used to make. That fear of silence in the car. But being able to ask a question and know to just shut up, because some people need time to process it, to break it down. And it used to feel uncomfortable leaving that level of silence. Obviously, you feel in the moment what is the right amount of time to leave it before maybe you step in and give a prompt or whatever you need to. But I enjoy sort of like learning to be a lot more quiet than I used to be.
No, I agree with that. That leads me to thinking then about some of the skills you might need in teaching students with special educational needs or that have challenges. So would you be able to, I suppose it's quite hard, would you be able to sum up any of those skills or those approaches that you think are particularly valid?
Okay. That's a good challenging question, that one. That's going to really make me think. I can spew out all of the obvious words like patience and all that kind of thing, but going a bit deeper than that. First of all, I'll just focus a little bit on knowledge. So I like to learn about conditions and whatever else, but nor do I actually think it's that important. So I'll pour a lot of time into studying a student's conditions. I might choose a student with a condition that I've never heard of before, because I want to learn about it. And I'll buy a book, and a podcast, and I'll get that background. But the problem is you can bog yourself down in the idea that you need to understand everything. And it detracts from the idea that the student is simply another individual. And all you have to do is work with who they are. You don't generally need to understand all of the ins and the outs of whatever the condition might be. Now, it can sometimes be helpful, but even then, I think only in a limited way. And it depends what the student wants to offer as well. So I wouldn't probe or dig. It's only what the pupil chooses to offer up in terms of that. One of the dangers of, in a way, getting too much knowledge is we can end up, in a way, kind of stereotyping a condition. You'll get a sentence, you know, like, oh, somebody with autism is always like this, so what you have to do is this, and it will work. And that detracts from the fact that actually the level of diversity within something like autism is huge.
Absolutely,
Absolutely huge. And there's that lovely line which everyone's heard, which the autistic community has sort of like come up with, which is the you know, if you've met one autistic student, you've met one autistic student. And that's the key, really. You got to go in with an open mind. You've got to go in sort of like working with the individual. Coaching really, really helps, you know, with that side of things. Again, dependent on how the student reacts and how they are. So I think that's quite important. The study, the knowledge, that kind of thing. Yes, it can be helpful. In the same way, you need to learn about the accommodations that you can get for the theory test, the show me, tell me, and for the driving test. But that side of things is simply learning a few bits. Once you've got it, you've got it. The bottom line is the ability to remove the pressure from yourself and to work at the pace of the students. Now, that might mean that what normally takes 2 hours takes 10 hours.
yes.
So you can end up with a situation where you're used to getting somebody onto, you know, an estate through the junctions in 2 to 4 hours. And it might well be that the timescales for that start quadrupling. It might be that in the early stages, the process runs a little bit slower, but later on, it could run a little bit quicker. Now, I find timescales is one of the most important points that I tend to bring up, because you simply can't force the student to learn faster than they're going to learn. You can get creative, you can get inventive, you can really start working outside the box, and that's just sprung a whole load of memories. You've got to unlock that creativity. Now, this is the cool thing. This means your job is about to become a lot more fun, because you suddenly start to investigate ideas that seem a little bit wacky, but sometimes the more weird they might be, the more chance you've got of it actually working. The one that sprung into my head is from last year with bay parking, when we were having, you know, quite severe difficulties with reversing into a bay. So we abandoned the car, and we got out, and we got into an imaginary invisible car. So we just stood in the car park in a pretend car, and we walked the bay park. And we did it from different angles, different positions. So walking backwards, walking around the white line, experimenting with different ways of doing it. What I'm not going to claim is that it magically works. But what it can undo is like unlock a little bit more of the process and just move a step forward another little bit until you finally get there. And of course, with things like maneuvers, you can take the pressure off with those anyway. They don't have to be perfect. You know, you never have to achieve the perfect bay park. It just has to be functional and safe. Obviously, safety is very important. So if you can't get it in one go, but you can on the second go, does it really matter that much? You can spend the rest of your life making a shunt to achieve the final result, and you still got yourself parked in Tesco's.
Yeah, exactly. It comes back to your first point about failure, doesn't it? Is that a failure if you've had to have a second go at it? Not really. Even further down the line, you can have as many goes as you like, so long as it's worked. It really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I think something that really resonated with me there is about this idea of pace. and about first. I know I don't think I've had the range of students you have, but there's certainly some students that sort of ping in my mind, and there's some where normally you'd maybe chunk it down into 5 segments, but now that's 50 segments of the same subject,
definitely.
and so now we're simply doing one small element of that thing, and you just have to build on that. But I really enjoy that, because you see their joy in learning those small segments, just like you would do in a bigger segment. So I always enjoyed that, and the challenge of it, because I think it screws with your head sometimes a little bit, because you have, like you say, you're having to be creative, you're having to think slightly differently about it. But I love that. I think that's great.
Me too. I get bored very easily. So I think having that sort of like constant challenge of, oh crikey, how on earth do we crack this one? And it makes me think and research and look at daft ideas and things. I find that is what motivates me a lot. And I think actually, when it all goes smoothly, there's a danger that I might start to switch off, because it's all just going fine and they're learning okay, and nothing's going wrong to the point where it's challenging me to have to do something which will really pique my interest and give me something to go and look into, or go on the internet and ask people, have you got any ideas? And that's another thing, never being afraid to ask for help.
Absolutely.
So I think going and asking for help is really important. Giving yourself that freedom to be able to say, I do not know how to solve this. And I will say that to a student as well, admitting your own weaknesses, and that you certainly don't see yourself as being perfect. It is a teamwork effort, and being able to say, to the student, sort of like, I don't know how to crack this, and between you sort of like talk about it and see if you can come up with ideas. And then I'll say, I'll go away, and what I'm going to do is, on a forum, I'm going to knock this out, and see what we get back, and then we'll try some new ideas, and then go from there. And we've got the ADI disability group, which I think is run by Hayden Jenkins and John Rogers, I believe, the disability driving instructors. Really good resources to be able to go to when you've got a problem, and you're looking for new ideas.
Absolutely. I've worked with those guys, and and I think because they usually offer a different range of students. I think some of them focus more on the physical side of things as well, but I think I think there's an element of everybody's got something they could develop and that they could improve. So interesting. So should we move on towards EVs now? What we started with was you getting in a Leaf and getting excited by driving again. So what would you say are the changes within a driving school, from a driving school perspective? Because I think it's really positive for a driving school to have electric vehicles. I think it's a really, really positive thing.
It is, yeah. It's a very positive thing. It's undoubtedly all heading in that direction. I mean, it took us 10 years to get EV sales from 0 to 1% of the new car market, and then only about 1 year for it to rocket up to 7% and rising fast. So it's looking like a bit of an unstoppable transition now. Obviously, all driving instructors have to make their own personal decision on when they decide to make that transition, and I guess that choice is going to be based on their own personal situation, and how they feel about the supply and demand side of automatic students as opposed to manual students. I think it is a very positive thing. I think it creates a good image, I suppose, for the business as well. I tend to focus more on it as like automatic. So when I'm advertising, when I'm marketing, I don't put a heavy push on the fact that, I'm an EV driving instructor. I put a very heavy push on the fact I am an automatic driving instructor, because in the same way I didn't advertise as a petrol driving instructor, I'm not teaching how to drive a specific car. I want their skills to be transferable So when they buy their automatic Nissan Micra, they're going to be fine. And they are fine. You know, I've done a lot of work with students going from an EV into a combustion automatic, and beyond noticing that it's a bit more rumbly, it's fine. You know, all of the skills transfer through, because ultimately, you know, nearly all of driving is really about dealing with what's happening outside those windows. So it's about that complex interaction with life outside of your windows. Driving shouldn't be about battling with the controls inside the car just to try and make the thing do what you want it to do. And that bit transfers through. But like all cars, you know, every car, there's a little bit of finding out where the buttons are, because the buttons are in different positions in different cars. But that does not just apply to EVs.
Absolutely. Do you think you've noticed a difference from a business perspective, so in the business model, because it's a different proposition really, isn't it?
Yeah. In terms of automatic, or in terms of electric, or both?
Well, both really. Yeah.
In terms of automatic, I think the bit that really caught me by surprise was the level of demand. So I went through the nervous, will there be enough work? I used to say I never get automatic inquiries, and I now know why. I wasn't advertising that I was an automatic driving instructor.
That'll be why.
It all makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
The moment I switched all of my marketing very, very heavily over to automatic, and I did give it quite a big push, I got swamped quite quickly, and remain swamped. The amount of business I found, it's huge, and it's going to keep rising, obviously, in terms of that sector. Whereas the manual side of things is obviously going to go into decline over time. So there was that element of it. Now for me, bear in mind, it partly made sense anyway, because I just spent about 5 years as a manual special needs instructor. What I realized was that some of my students didn't want to learn manual, but they were coming to me for the special needs side of things.
Yeah.
They would much rather have been learning special needs automatic, but because I had a manual car, they were learning manual. And there's a good handful in my mind from those years that really should have been in an automatic.
Yeah.
And this is where I'm going to use the line, you shouldn't put someone in a situation where they will simply be coping in a manual car when they could be thriving in a modern automatic car. There are a lot of people out there, and this included myself, who cope in manual cars. That's not thriving, they're just getting by. And the transition to automatic, to EV, could actually do what it did for me and other people as well, unlock that, oh, actually, I'm quite enjoying driving now.
Yes.
So I think that's quite an important side of that as well. So the automatic side of things, lots of business. I accept it could be geographical. You know, I'm in Nottingham. We have, top of my head, I can think of 9 driving instructors in Nottingham using EVs. Many of us using other automatics as well. And we don't have enough. You know, if we had enough, I'm sure my phone wouldn't be ringing quite so much. Types of students, again, if you switch into the automatic side of things, you will probably get an increase in calls from the special needs side of things, from students who have tried manual and are having difficulties. So you might find you get an increase in students who have experienced difficulties with trying to learn to drive. That could mean that you are tackling students who will need more support. You know, going from a manual to an automatic is going to help, but there's probably going to be some underlying reasons why they might be struggling, and they're going to need a lot more than just an automatic car to get them to the finish line. They're going to need a very supportive instructor along that journey as well. Going electric, one thing I have found is that it's a niche market, very, very niche, but there is a small market out there for students who only want to learn in an electric car and will never drive combustion. I had 2 last year. I can think of at least 5 of my students who have gone on to buy EVs. Yeah, they're expensive. but if you can figure out the running cost reductions and make it work in your head, then it's not quite as expensive as people often think it is. But I certainly wouldn't base my business around just trying to teach people who want electric cars, because the amount of demand wouldn't be strong enough. But you will attract that market of people who would like a lesson in an EV, who would like to do a lesson in one before they buy their own one. Maybe they've bought one and they want you to even go out in their one and give them a little bit of support. I've done a few of those. In fact, my very first ever lesson in the Nissan Leaf was one of those. And I get the odd request for that every now and again as well. But again, niche market.
I found it interesting to hear you say about the handful, albeit, of students that said that they'd never wanted the combustion, they just wanted the EV. Was there a particular drive for that, or was there a particular reason for the
one that's in my head at the moment was a girl who, I remember her saying she'd always thought about learning to drive, but I think her grounding was a very strong environmental case. So she had gone vegan, and I think that the whole environmental side of things was very, very important to her. So the rise of the electric cars suddenly created a situation where she felt like she could learn to drive. Yeah, she's now got a Nissan Leaf, so that all went okay. Which brings us on to that kind of reason of why people, drive electric cars, because if you look at the media, there's this impression that everyone buying an electric car is buying them for the environment, and that simply isn't true. In the same way, when people go and buy a petrol diesel car, they're not thinking about, the environmental effect of, what car they're picking. The same is true for EVs. The number one reason people drive EVs is the driving experience. They test drive one, or they end up with one for a week for some reason, and suddenly discover that the driving experience is quite different. It's quite addictive, and it's that which is the gateway towards an EV. The second reason is the cost savings. For some people, the running cost savings can be significant, particularly if you're high mileage. And when your brain suddenly realizes, hang on, this is cheaper than combustion, that can be another trigger. I would say it's the minority who go EV just on the environmental basis. It exists, and don't get me wrong, the environmental basis is really, really important. And the clean air thing was a part of my trigger, but it certainly was not the primary reason.
No. Do you find it's made a difference to your running costs?
Hugely. So my very first EV was £12,000, and that was a 9-month-old Nissan Leaf, which gives you an idea of just how bad the depreciation was a few years ago. I thought that was an amazing bargain.
Isn't it? Yeah.
And my running costs back then, I was putting £240 a month of petrol into my Toyota Yaris, and that dropped to £70 a month on electricity for the Nissan Leaf. So the savings were really significant, and I can't remember the calculations that I worked out back then, but I worked out, within so many years, the running cost savings would have completely paid off the car. And I suppose in a way I can then argue I've got a free car and into profit from that point. When I switched to my next Nissan Leaf, I went to lease, and I was paying £310 a month to lease my tuition EV. But by that point, my running costs were down to £30 a month because I changed energy supplier to get it even cheaper. And I worked out I was saving at least, without exaggerating, at least £200 a month in running cost savings. Now, if you take that £200 off the £310 lease costs, that's about 100 quid, 100 quid for a brand new EV. So as far as I'm concerned, by my man maths, that was the cheapest car that I ever owned. My current one is a bit more pricey, but that's the problem with EVs. Sort of like you buy your first one, and then you go, oh, I'll upgrade to the next one. Oh, I'll upgrade to the next one. But I'm done now. This is a long-term investment. I've got to run this high mileage to make it financially work. But as far as I'm concerned, I reckon that the cost of the car minus the savings makes it roughly the same as combustion. But here's my argument. I'm paying exactly the same as I would be for combustion for a far better product.
Oh, absolutely.
Normally, we have to pay more for a better product. So I'm happy.
Yeah. That's a good point. I like that. Very much so. You got an E-Nero, have you?
Yeah, so the E-Nero is, I think, that's the point we took a big step, because the first generation EVs, would manage about, realistically, 70, 80 miles. And I got by with difficulties in one of those. Then it kind of crept up towards about 120 to 150 miles. And suddenly we took this giant leap to 300 miles. Now, what's really interesting is that's exactly the same range as my last petrol car. So my Toyota Yaris, I used to refill it roughly every 250 miles, because by that point it was down in the red. So I'm now going to argue that modern EVs are matching and beginning to exceed some petrol cars. So yeah, a lot of the Korean EVs, so we're talking Hyundai and Kia, are renowned for being very, very efficient. So they're able to get more mileage out of the battery. And it's true, I was gobsmacked to find that all through summer, it was returning between 300 to about 340 miles each day. And that was genuine. I was genuinely getting that, despite the fact that the car is advertised as being up to 282 miles. So it was smashing beyond its advertised maximum. At the moment, the car sat out there on about 50% battery, and it's showing about 130 miles. So if we scale that up to 100%, that's about 260 miles in winter. Now, I actually do 200-mile days, which is partly why I need that. So for various reasons, I'm doing some very, very long days now when I'm actually working, which I'm not at the moment, obviously. So even in the worst case scenario, it goes beyond what I could possibly need. It's rock solid. It's brilliant. You can tell I like it. I've driven a lot of EVs, and my biased opinion is that the E-Nero is the best all-rounder, especially for the price.
I agree. Yeah. The bit we hadn't really talked about there is the whole maintenance sort of part of that, because from my perspective, like, you don't think how many miles your washing machine has done, have you? Do you know what I mean? So that's because it hasn't got an engine, it hasn't got lots of moving parts and fan belt. Well, it probably has got a belt, but it's not something you think about. Whereas with combustion, you are thinking about that all the time, and there's so many parts to go wrong. So there must be part of that man maths, your words. We have to factor that in, and so when we talk about leases, many people get vehicles on 2 or 3 year lease. Well, in fact, you can probably have a longer lease with an EV, if not buying it, because it's going to last you longer than your combustion, I think.
No, I agree. And it's always a little bit hard to answer us, because in the early days, of course, we've yet to have that many EVs going, into the high mileage, because they've only really been on the market for the last 10 years or so. Having said that, we do have examples out there that are in the hundreds of thousands of miles, with varying different results. The bottom line is, the technology is getting stronger and stronger as we move on from old battery chemistries to new battery chemistries, as we learn more. Servicing, with the Nissan Leaf, I used to pay £120 per service, but that included a year's breakdown cover, so I was really happy with that. And I have a very clear memory of going into Nissan one day, and the lady behind me had her Qashqai in. When I sat down, she booked hers in, and they said, and that's £300. And I thought, I've forgotten how expensive combustion cars are to service. 300 quid when I was used to paying 120. And that was at the Nissan dealership. Now, the Kia has only had one service so far. And the dealership charged me £85 for that. Now, I don't know how much the second service will be, so I'm not going to guarantee that it's always that cheap. However, what we can say is it's definitely cheaper than combustion, and these are the main dealership prices. So imagine what's happening now that the third-party independents are just starting to come on board. We've got mobile EV servicing has just kicked off this year. So you can just book it and they come to your house and they'll just sort it well out on the driveway. And that's cheaper than the main dealership prices. I need to get some quotes on that. Yeah, basically, it's definitely cheaper. And you've got 90% moving parts. So theoretically, there's not very much that can go wrong. However, I'm very careful not to claim that EVs are invincible, because anything we build has the capacity to go wrong. Yes. But we can confidently say that the amount of things going wrong is reducing, and the more we're learning as we develop the tech, it's just becoming more and more solid. Nothing's gone wrong for me. I've done, since 2017, I've easily covered, oh goodness, I don't know, 100,000 miles, electric miles, and beyond a slightly creaky door mirror, nothing has gone wrong. And I've never had that with combustion. You know, all of my 6 Toyotas, yes, they were brilliant. Yes, they were reliable, but they all had something which, you know, went a little bit wrong.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Like, surely something has gone not quite right with electric.
A screw came loose on the spoiler of the e-Nero. Screwed it back in again. And the Nissan Leaf has a quirk. So in my experience, all cars have some kind of quirk. I don't think I've ever owned a car that hasn't made some odd noise at some point. The Nissan Leaf is notorious for having creaky door mirrors. So you know when they fold in, they auto fold in. And after about a year, they start to develop this horrendous noise. And then you take it in and then they sort it and then it's fine again. And then a year later, it happens again. Bit annoying, but they haven't, you know, changed the design and sorted it. But, you know, that's the limit of, you know, my experience. Oh, I should tell you about the Achilles heel of the electric car. It's the 12-volt battery. So whenever something goes wrong with an EV, it's the 12-volt battery. So it's absolutely ridiculous that the cars carry these huge traction batteries, absolutely full of energy. But if the 12-volt battery dies, the whole car's inaccessible. And that's because we're still building EVs on combustion architecture. So we're using old style car design and we're building EVs on that platform. Now we're just starting to get away from that. And the very first cars have now been developed without a 12-volt battery. So it's going to be a problem of the past. But nearly every issue that people get, it's simply a 12-volt battery. You know, get a new one in there and it all springs back to life again.
Brilliant. Well, that's a good that's a good thing to end on with electric vehicles. We should move on to the fun questions now, if you're happy to do that, because
absolutely fun questions.
Been a bit heavy so far, really, but good in many ways. Okay, so road trip then. So you've got COVID, post-COVID, and you know, money no object, and you know, dreams and everything. So what would be your road trip? What vehicle? Where would you go?
Okay, my version is probably going to be a little bit tame, I suppose, and minimalistic, because to explain my road trip, I'll have to take you back to one that I did in 2013 on my wife, myself and my wife's 10th wedding anniversary. When my kids were with my parents, and we had about 8 days. So we just got in the car, our Toyota Avensis back then, and we drove south. And we just chucked in the boot of the car, a pop-up tent, sleeping bags, all the rest of it, and we had no plan, no destination, nothing booked on where to stay. And we spent 8 days just inventing a road trip. So every morning we'd get up, get the map out, choose somewhere new to head towards. When we got there, we'd be trying to find some accommodation. Some ended up in campsites and little bed and breakfast. And we documented it all on Facebook, and people started offering us places to stay. So that was really cool as well. And we did surfing and open water swimming in rivers and the sea and stuff like that. It was brilliant. So my dream road trip would be to maybe in 2023, for the next wedding anniversary, what that would be, the 20-year wedding anniversary, to do that again, but this time round to go north rather than south, with no plan, no idea on what to do, and just see what happens. And of course, it would be in the EV. Probably take my one though, rather than the wife's one, for a bit
Yeah.
further on the range. And
Yeah.
the adventure of going places where the charging network's a bit rubbish might make it a little bit more interesting as well. So for me, that would personally be my idea of an exciting road trip.
Well, Scotland's meant to be amazing for plug-in chargers, apparently. So I'm
Whereas
told.
Wales is not.
No.
we go to Wales and it's not great. Yeah, it's like a 3-pin plug in the back of a car park somewhere. Yeah. Luckily, the campsite in Wales that we did go to did have proper chargers at the campsite, so we were fine. But you literally have to use the last rapid charger going into Wales, and then there is pretty much nothing.
Plus
and they
hills.
really have.
Plus the hills.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's quite fun going down the hill and finding that you've gained a whole load of mileage from the regenerative system as you go down the hill, but then you just lose it all again when you go up the next hill. So it's all a bit of a false economy.
Absolutely. So your road trip sounds cool, actually. I like that idea. I like that.
Unplanned road trip, yeah.
So what about if there was a dream garage then? So if you were to have money, no object, you've got a garage, what cars or objects would you have in there?
Right, you're not going to get anything too fancy out of me. Again, I think this is my sort of like minimalist, cost-saving, efficiency brain. But being really boring, sort of like I've currently got my dream combo of the Kia e-Niro and the Hyundai Ioniq. So rather boringly, I have to admit that I currently find our driveway of cars to be my, I suppose, perfect combination. Having said that, I'm very, very tempted by the Jaguar I-Pace. I really like that. I really like the I-Pace, and it's a lot more money, and it's not as efficient as the e-Niro, but it's a Jaguar I-Pace, and that would definitely be, if money was no object, something I would be very much considering.
Sounds cool. It's not a car I've driven either yet, the I-Pace.
Oh, do you know what? I have driven it, and I was terrible because Jaguar run a challenge. So they set forward these cones with flashing lights, and they sit you in the car with a co-driver who shouts at you where you're supposed to go. And then the cones light up, and you have to drive between the two cones that have lit up green, not the red ones. And then they time you. So the guy before me, was quite literally just screeching around the track and making lots of noise. Whereas I'm the complete opposite. So I tootled very slowly around this course, and got it wrong and went the wrong way. And eventually the co-driver guy just stopped talking to me and just left me to my own devices. And I didn't even bother to look at where I came out on the leaderboard, but I enjoyed it.
Who cares?
Another thing I failed. Didn't win that.
It doesn't matter, does it? You had a driving
good experience.
That's what matters. Absolutely. Absolutely. So you mentioned at the start you like reading books and reading. If there were, if you could whittle that down maybe to a handful of books, maybe 2 or 3, what would? So Desert Island Disc, what books would you take with you?
Books would be This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay. You heard of that?
No.
Okay. So Adam Kay used to work in the NHS, and the book is kind of his account of his experiences, and it is ridiculously funny. So I would find myself, laughing out loud, driving between lessons or walking the dogs. But at the same time, it's very serious as well, and gives you quite an insight into the medical profession and the NHS. It's really good. And there's now a theatre version of it where he does some kind of stand-up version of his book, which we're booked into, but it got moved due to COVID. So I'm really looking forward to that. The other one that I really enjoyed and it stuck in my mind is a book called My Son Is Not Rain Man, which is by a guy called John Williams. And it's just a father's account of his life raising his autistic kid, but again, very funny. Got lots of memories of laughing way through that one, and very serious as well. So they're both books that manage to strike that balance between telling a story, having that real life element to them, managing the serious points really well, but at the same time getting the humor just right. Two superb books.
And well written by the sounds of it.
Oh, very well written. Yeah. And they're not too long either. So yeah, not huge books. They're a sensible size that anyone can enjoy.
Very good. I know you mentioned fencing, but is there something else that you do that we don't know about? Nobody else knows. You
Well, fencing is my number one hobby, I think, now, and that came around through a desire to be active. You know, sitting in a car all day long, thinking about the health issues. I knew that I needed a sport, and I'm not very sporty, so something like football would never have been for me. So fencing it was, and in anticipation of that, I've even brought my prop along with me. So this is my pistol grip foil. So every Monday, Wednesday, I'll be doing that, and hopefully joining in new tournaments in the future. Outside of that, things that people might not know I do. I like volunteering. So I used to volunteer like a homeless thing run by the Sikh community. That was awesome. That was really, really interesting. But I have a slight habit of, I suppose this is part of me getting bored, quickly. I'll do something. It's a fad for a bit, and then I'll try something else. So just before lockdown, we did bee surveying. So just volunteered randomly to go and do some bee surveying out in the Peak District. That was really good.
Do you have to count them? Do you have to count them? Really?
Yeah. So you go on a walk through something called a transect. I think that's right. So like an area that you're given, and with the team, you have to sort of like just keep walking at a set pace. And you can only record anything you see, while you're walking at that pace in that time as a way of controlling the records. And then you put the bee in the little pot, and then you identify it. And I learned that the female bees are very aggressive, whereas the male ones are really docile. So when you've got a female bee, because in the pot it will be getting that's the one. Very, very excited. And then you have to let the lid off and let it go. So the other one, tree planting, that was a great thing to volunteer for. A massive community tree planting where you and about, oh my goodness, 200 other people that you've never met before, all go out, and you're each allocated like an area in a giant field, and then in sort of like a few hours, you've managed to plant a lot of trees, and stuff like that. It's free, and it's a really good day out. Doesn't cost you any money. Does good, and it's very, very memorable. So as soon as we get out of lockdown, I'll be looking for more odd little things like that we can volunteer for.
That sounds amazing. Absolutely amazing. It sounds awesome. What I'd like to do is say thank you, because I choose my people very carefully doing this, because I'm always looking for inspirational people, and you're certainly inspirational in many ways. I think that your work with special needs is really interesting, and I think maybe makes us think a bit differently about the way we approach things. I think the fact that you call it automatic lessons, but it's EV really, and I think the passion for that shows.
On my website, I write automatic and electric, so they're both there.
Yeah, exactly. Amazing. So and certainly I assume if people want to find out more, you're the man to speak to. If they wanted to find out about electric, you're the man.
Always happy to chat to anyone about electric cars and feasibility, including the problems, because it's important to be realistic, and for some people it's not the right time.
No. My aim is my lease runs out on my car, which unfortunately is combustion, in 12 months time, and I tried to get electric last round, but it just didn't work. But certainly my next one is definitely going to be EV, by hook or by crook. So
I would say for a lot of people, their next car won't be electric, but maybe the one after it might be, because you know, if you jump in too soon, you can put yourself into a stressful scenario, and then you're not going to have the fun experience that others are reporting. So yeah,
that's
it's got
what
to
my
match your
parents
needs.
did. That's exactly what my parents
Oh
did.
no! And then you
24
end up in the
kilowatt
Daily Mail, sort of like complaining about them. Yeah.
nearly the 24 kilowatt hour leaf, and it wasn't quite enough.
No,
Yeah,
you've got to be to survive in a 24 kilowatt leaf. You've got to be die hard and completely prepared to adapt your lifestyle around the car. That that's proper early adopter stuff. That yeah.
Well, I remember my dad driving us to somewhere that wasn't all that far away. I think it was only 25 miles away. We had a full charge as well. And he was getting quite nervous that we wouldn't get back. And I was like, Dad, you're going to be absolutely fine. So I remember the journey there, we were doing truck speed on the motorway, just slightly faster than the trucks, you know, keeping up with nice and steady. And like we got there, we had loads of range left, probably had just as much as what we left, really, 80 miles, 70 miles or something.
Yeah,
Needless to say, I found out the top speed of the Leaf on the way back. Because there was plenty of power left. So yeah, I learned quite a bit about the Leaf that day. But yeah, it's you have to be, it has to be the right stage for you, doesn't it? Really?
Yeah, and I tell you what, I mean, we did some 300-mile journeys in those early EVs, and this is the way in which I would put it: if you get your mindset right and you treat that journey like an adventure, it's fine.
Yeah.
But if you're expecting it to do, you know, what your petrol car does, you will have a stressful experience. And if you don't want that, you know, wait until you can get a 300-mile range EV. But if you can get your mind around the idea of, oh, this is an adventure, where's the charging network? And you're prepared to take a break and, you know, grab your lunch while it charges. Actually, I really enjoyed it. And I haven't mentioned this, but with the early ones, I built in a 45-minute break where I would sit in the local Holiday Inn with me coffee, doing me admin. Every now and again, I'd order some food while the car charged in the car park. You know what? I miss that. I don't need it anymore because I've got so much blooming range that, you know, I could do several days without charging. But I actually miss having that break, sat in the hotel, chilling out for a bit. And I wouldn't mind going back to that if I had to.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for the road safety aspect of having a relatively small range on your vehicle. There's certainly a line, but there's a lot to be said with the fact that, you know, I mean, how much is your bladder range and how much is your concentration range? You know, we probably do need to stop. And I think 300 miles is a push for anybody in both respects. You know, so absolutely.
Great, really nice to chat to you. Thanks very much for that.
Take care. Bye.
Have a nice evening.
Just want to say thanks to Rob for that, and don't forget to check out his channels, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks.